Do we have anybody?
No one virtually except Liam has joined.
Okay.
Oh, I was just gonna give you that.
Well, you can hear you, so.
I can hear you. I didn't hear what you said.
No, I was just gonna give you a nod for
Taking the night.
passing the buck on the council corner.
I have about 103 fever, and I thought maybe not sharing that with everyone would be good.
Yeah, maybe time to sign off,
you.
Liam. Thank you.
Yeah, you don't need to be here. Take some aspirin.
I'm okay. Enjoy the conversation. I'll be around.
Hope
Thank
you're feeling
you.
better.
This
Take care. Hobby. This is his hobby.
All right, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and kick things off. Today is May 30th. It's 5:30. We are in the Public Safety Building this evening for our last and third budget roundtable of the FY24 budget season. I'm joined tonight by the Town Council Finance Chair, John Clucci, members of the Finance Committee, Don Hamill, and then the Town Council Chair has also joined us. So we are in robust attendance for the council this evening. And so at this point, like I always do, I will turn it over to constituents for questions and conversation. And if you guys don't have anything that springs to mind, then we're happy to kind of kick things off on our end too. So take it away, residents.
Well, just a question, since I haven't been paying that much attention, where do we stand now in terms of what's the current mill rate projection?
Great question. Pass you right over to John.
So I technically, we stand where we ended first reading as a council, which was, I think it was, I know I have it. I think it was 4.3% increase. There's been activity between the school board. They took their action at their second reading. The finance committees, we're going to take our action tomorrow. The way things have played out, it looks like it would come in around 4% change, and we're going to be deliberating on additional actions to get potentially back to the 3% original target tomorrow. That would require an additional 700,000 plus or minus of reductions. So right now I'm taking the appetite of the council for, is there a desire to get there? Initially, it appears that there is.
Yeah, I mean, we always have seem to have a favorable bounce at the end, at least we've had in the past, so it'd be nice to continue that trend if we can.
I'm comfortable getting close to 3%, but if we have to be a little bit over because of some of the choices that have been made in terms of, I know a lot of the work you guys have done have been trying to appropriate versus bond capital, which just naturally increases the taxpayer burden, but the benefit is starting to chip away at our debt in advance of a big school coming. And I think that's a trend personally, I think is a good thing to be doing, to start that process now, to be able to kind of hopefully not be so reliant on debt over the next few years. So if that means we come in a little over 3% because we're making good financial decisions with our debt in mind, I'm supportive of that.
Yeah, so a couple of things that we're advocating for is not using debt for school buses, which we've traditionally done, and the plows. So those are the kind of the big ticket changes that we buy every year, we use debt for every year. We know once we hit that initial, get over that initial crunch or hurdle, we'll be saving the debt service costs on those items. We did it on the school side by tapping the capital reserve fund, which has the money there. But also the school's been running a surplus, a pretty healthy surplus for a while now. So our suggestion was that they should use that surplus to replenish that fund at the end of the fiscal year. And I think they're eyeing that as well. On the town side, we have a recreation reserve fund that it's a fee that the town had been charging for a long time, but there was no statutory basis for why we were charging the fee. It wasn't, we couldn't find any council action that authorized it. So we no longer charge the fee, but we have a fund sitting there. And the guidance is to spend the money to reduce what liability may be there for those who paid into that fund.
How did that money get there? I'm sorry.
Developers. So it was the recreation fee was assessed by the planning board when they approved different developments.
And the balance is about what?
I believe it's about 400 and something thousand, most of which is being tapped in this budget.
And that's for the community center?
No,
What did you guys? do?
no, so the recreation, is being
House.
used for, I can actually,
That's an okay use.
what's that?
Well, it wasn't, I think John was saying we couldn't find statutory like spending for having collected the fee. And so at this point now we have an account that was not necessarily earmarked for any one thing in particular.
It's not for recreation.
That's
That's what
what,
it was called.
that's what it's
Right,
called.
so there's no implication that that's what it's supposed to be spent on.
Technically, council action can direct where the funds go. What the kind of funds are used for. The specific items from this budget that we were directing, or the finance committee is suggesting that we direct it to is after they do the turf and track, there's gonna be some crack filling that needs to happen around the Mitchell Sports Complex. So there's $15,000 that would go to that. There's $50,000 of parks ADA compliance projects that
Yeah.
I can't enumerate. I don't remember specifics for what those relate to.
Some
There's
of them are definitely at Wiley.
yeah, there's water fountains and bottle fillers at Wiley and Black Point Park. There's a concession and restroom maintenance and repair at Springbrook.
Yeah.
And then there's a holiday tree at Memorial Park, replacing that and relocating the power. So those are which I think that was the gist of what that fee was intended to be, is to help a growth contribute to the upkeep and expansion of our parks. Yeah, so that's mostly where the plow money's coming from, indirectly.
I understand the school buses and the plows make sense to me. That's an ongoing routine every, what, 3 or 4
Replacement
years.
expectation, yep.
Right. The one that doesn't make sense to me is the 825,000 for the public safety call system, whatever, dispatch system, whatever it is. That's a, useful life of what, 10 or 15 years. That's something we always in the past would have bonded. And I really don't, there's another 700,000 that would come right off the mill rate increase if we bonded that as we have historically. And that just doesn't make sense to me.
So for anomalies like that, it would be eligible for bond. And I don't, so the way the TIFs work is all of the taxes collected on increased value goes into this TIF fund. Okay, and then they can be used for certain allowable projects. This one happens to be an allowable project. So, but if we take that project out of being funded by the TIF account and move it over to bonding, that 825,000 is still going into the TIF account. So there's not really an impact on the tax, like on the mill rate, at least this year.
If it's not spent on something else.
It would either sit in
We
the
would have
account.
to take something
or-
from the operating budget that was also eligible
Yes.
for that $800,000.
Of which there's plenty.
Well,
I don't
I don't
know,
know.
last year we,
so all of Setco is already being covered by, TIF account. I think 75% of the public safety debt service is being covered by the TIF account. There's not that many other allowable
Eligible.
expenses other than like the community center and the school.
I thought there was like a 4-page list of eligible things, including, salaries and wages for, people that are,
For planning
I mean-
staff, some of that is allowable. Yeah.
it seems, there's some pretty broad language in there, as I recall, from the list of things that are available. So I'm concerned that we found this one specific large item as opposed to dealing with ongoing operating expenses.
So from your perspective, then you would advocate for using that $800,000 rather than to pay for something we have historically bonded
Right.
and apply it to things that are in the operating budget that are eligible.
Right.
Okay, and I think, I mean, that's a fair discussion to have. We have that conversation every year, whether to take it, whether to bond more or, and in the past, we've used, because there's only so many levers, we talk about there only being so many levers that we can pull really, and we've used bonding in the past to, lower the mill rate, and we've been criticized for that. So I think we're trying to walk that line, right, between.
Say, you didn't expect me to say that.
I did not,
I think, I
that's,
think,
but that's,
But it's historic. I think that the progress that you make in terms of snowplows and school buses is what was intended, as opposed to, going way
way
overboard.
over, okay.
And
Yeah, I think there's also a related
fair.
question with that in terms of authority to appropriate a figure like that, that's over 600,000. So, and we haven't really gotten into that discussion so far, but that I have heard that raised by other people.
It has been, so early on, I asked for, I guess, a clarification memo on that topic, and I have not received it yet. This one, the way I read it, it is a capital improvement, at least the initial setup and purchase of the software, and then it becomes more of an operating expense after that. So that's why it's eligible. I view it as being eligible for the downtown TIF funds.
Old
I
inflated
think-
problem, right?
Yeah, if you do move it to bonds, I do believe it would require voter approval.
mhm. So, but to Steve's point, like, have we thoroughly vetted other qualified uses to determine that this is the best use of that TIF? Or, I mean, my immediate inclination was, I don't think there would be many things that would scratch the surface, that we would still have a sizable chunk of the TIF money in the account.
So all the money's earmarked right now that
Mhm.
was gonna be there, so no, we didn't,
Okay,
I can't say that I dug deeper to
See what else
say if
is
I
out.
pulled this
I just
out and
don't-
added this in.
I'm interested to look at what we can do with the TIFs, just to see, because again, I remember it being pretty restrictive. But
Oh, see, and that's funny, because I agree with Steve. I think the list, but the second time we updated the list last year, we had increased the eligible items by pretty much the full expanse of what we thought we could get in there for allowable use. So
I did add like the park ranger position. I think there's some things that you could tie to
Mhm.
growth related to the downtown that would be eligible.
I mean, the new police and fire positions, I mean, aren't those? They're directly related more or less to the growth. I mean, that would seem like a natural place to me. I mean, I know.
I'll have to take a look at
Yeah, I have to
the
look at that.
language,
I know,
yeah.
I mean, Falmouth, and they have I think a robust tip program, and they spread it all over. 2.5% of this person's salary, and it's just, it's an accounting nightmare for one thing, but they find ways to assign the expenses to the tip proceeds, so.
So can those tip revenues be used for any school expenses, or are they used for school expenses?
They're not currently used to go towards any of the schools' operating budget. I don't know.
Not,
I don't think you
If
should
it's
go
an
back to
affordable
school.
housing tip, then there are some allowances. What we do have is for the school arrangement, that those debt service costs could be
Yeah.
eligible uses of the funds.
Future building project, but
And then
Not current.
indirectly, the school benefits from
Yeah.
using the funds this way, because your general purpose aid is gonna go up in direct proportion to what's being captured. I mean,
Yeah, do we know what impact that has had or is projected to have on the funding formula? I know there's a lot of other things. that go
well,
into it, but-
as basic form. The funding formula is 7.14 mils per 100,000 of assessed value, 1,000 of assessed value. When you shelter something from the assessed value, it's a one-to-one. So overall, what we're capturing, at least the latest estimate is around 58 cents on the dollar. We will recover through either the general purpose aid or revenue sharing or savings and county tax.
I think too, we've gotten to take a little bit of a sigh of relief or a deep breath on the funding formula because of the current administration's commitment to fund 50% of special education costs. Because that shifted us from being minimal receivers and took us kind of well above that threshold. And so we weren't waiting every year on the edge of that cliff to see whether we were gonna continue to be minimal receivers or not.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to, and I can go back and watch the meetings about the TIF, but if you're adding $200 million in value to the town, you're only sheltering some of that, so you're still adding to the town's assessed value. That's still going up.
Right now, we're sheltering 100%.
Oh, okay,
And that's a decision that
okay.
Yeah, our
if we don't
capture
have
rate is
allowable
100%.
uses for it, that might have to go down as the development continues, but right now we found it places to use the funds.
So there is specific language in the last update of the. Whatever the governing
Application,
document
yeah,
is,
whatever.
that says school, capital.
No, it's I think it's worded more like a municipal facility that's leased. Something along those lines.
Well, how is a municipal facility that's leased a school? I mean, I don't.
It could be a school, and I guess the research that was done around it, kind of like you were saying, is that you can have a loosely related entity that is the person that's leasing the facility to school department. So it could be SEDCO or a new entity or, education foundation or something. So under those conditions, it would be an allowable use of the TIF revenues.
But not a pool.
Now you could do a community center.
Yeah,
the same way.
community center,
Mhm.
yeah, Shauna spoke with a pretty high degree of certainty
And you
and,
communicate
Yeah.
with DECD about it
Yeah.
as well.
yeah.
She spoke at a meeting, or is there a memo?
Well, when we first put, I mean, this was over a year ago now, right, that we were redoing our TIF application and amending it, and so it's not fresh in my mind at all, but I do remember, because I was chair at the time of the finance committee, I do remember Shauna speaking, I think at 2 different meetings as to her level of comfort, and then language wise, what she was willing to put in and what the ECD had said that they would approve in terms of language to make sure that a school was going to be considered an allowable use.
So is there a memo or something to that effect?
Let me see if I.
One
can
of the
find it.
meetings was when Paul was chair. There's a couple of meetings.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. It may have predated me too.
And then I think it finished, I think you finished it.
Yeah.
I remember her being there.
John, did I hear you say that the school had the second reading of their budget?
Yes.
And have there been any cuts to the school side of the budget?
There's been changes. I can talk through what those are. So debt service expense was reduced 157,000. And then it really is the town that gives them the estimate for debt service. So that's just, I don't know what happened with the initial estimate, but it was reduced 157,000. They reduced their operating budget 409,000. And they also lost 482,000 in funding from the state. Of
Where was the 400 reduction in the operating budget?
course, what I'm looking at is the total.
Not fine, yeah.
I do have the detail I can put
They didn't do it on the direction of the council, though.
No, they weren't.
through the course of their review.
Yeah, through the course of their review, there has not been any council formal action to request that they prepare any kind of reductions to their budget at this point.
Yeah, that's what we do at second reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So once we have our second reading,
We can direct
they'll have
them.
another we pass the final budget, they'll have another meeting to kind of see where it gets distributed.
If it's not out of line, I'd like to make a statement regarding my feelings of the school and where we are.
Go for it.
I fully understand that there is a need for school. What I don't like at all has been the process. The school board now is in my estimation, in total panic mode. And I think that was on display at the last council meeting where you folks were talking about perhaps delaying the authorization of the signing of the letter of intent by a couple of weeks. And the lady who was chairman of the board about jumped out of her seat and somebody calmed her down and she sat back down. But I believe that the Board of Education has put the town in the crisis it's in. This need didn't happen yesterday, last week, a month ago, 6 months ago. It's been on, the finance lady at the same meeting, I forget is her name, Mrs. Bolton.
Hey, Bolton.
She made reference, I believe, something to the effect that she's been talking with Harriman since 2013
Mhm.
about addressing needs in Scarborough School. So what is real concern to me is that whatever has happened, the time is gone, we can't go back. We are where we are. But I don't want to see us making irrational, quick decisions that turn out to bite us in the backside. And I believe that that's what the school board is trying to force right now, because they don't have, it's a slight exaggeration, 2 minutes of time to waste. I mean, the schedule for this, as I understand it, is laid out not quite to the minute, but awfully close. And that's just wrong. The taxpayers, this town didn't put us in this position. I believe the sole problem lies with the Board of Education, superintendent, whatever, all of those people who didn't. Why didn't they address this before? And I fully understand we can't backtrack. But
Yeah, I would say there's probably like 30 reasons
And
why this didn't happen before.
And I'll shoulder some of it. I was on the board, I was chair. We also had a town chair, council that said absolutely no big capital projects will come before us this year. 3 years ago, that was said,
During
What was that,
COVID.
1 year?
you know?
COVID.
And so, there was a full year there where the council
1 year,
basically
yeah.
closed the door and said, we're not entertaining these discussions. So there's a lot of reasons, I think,
Yeah.
why this has
Mhm.
There's the state application,
chugged along. There's the
School
state app,
had
we
to
were
go
waiting for the
through.
state application.
but it was 2 years of saving
Yeah.
up enough funds
Yep,
just to hire someone to help plan it.
yeah,
Well, I would,
and a global pandemic.
yeah, I just want to add, like, to Kate's point of this starting in 2013, this has been a process and it's been pretty vetted. The problem has been the starts and stops for
Yes.
various
Well, and the
reasons.
Public safety building came before the school.
Yeah,
So when we go back to 2013, we're talking, the public safety building was in pretty dire need of voter approval around that same time. And so, there was competition
Yeah.
for funds and where
But
people had energy.
at the end of the day, though, I think the real critical point is that the need is there. It's always been there. And it hasn't been acted on. And with the latest enrollment study that was done, the point to me that's like the most compelling point is that we're gonna likely have 100 new kindergartners in 2027, but nowhere to put them. Like that's a fact that we're gonna have that situation. And in order to build anything, it's gonna take probably, a referendum as early as November to have a school built and ready for the 2027.
There's no guarantee you're gonna have a.
It's true, it's true. Well, that's true, but I'm saying, but that's,
Space for those kids. Yeah. In total respect to what happened. And the signing of that letter, I believe was wrong. I believe I'm quoting you correctly, John, when you said it is a non-binding agreement. And I'm sorry, I find a legal document written by lawyers, signed by the town manager, is not a legal binding document.
I mean, there are elements of it that are binding. So there's a section specifically that has binding provisions. But those binding provisions, the one that we struck, I think was probably the one with the most teeth in it that was related to 8.16 in our CEA. So if you really look at what was binding in it, it's kind of worth the piece of paper that it's written on, which is why we're taking the next step, using that as a foundation to put together an option agreement that really will outline all of the specific terms that we have to agree to. That will be a binding document that really preserves us the right to potentially purchase that property by, I think, December 31st, 2024. So option agreements tend to be, the conceptual framework that we've agreed to and a commitment to partner as we go forward to work through a deal. And now we have between now and essentially July 31st to work through those items. And we're planning to do a working session with all parties to try and get as much progress as we can on the outstanding items that need to get addressed. A lot of those relate to infrastructure. Until the site was selected, the school hasn't fully done their site design. That's going to impact infrastructure costs. So we'll need to revisit and make sure that those are appropriately accounted for in the deal. There's still we still need to agree on purchase price. So we have not done that. We've kicked off an appraiser recently. So there's still a lot of things that need to happen for this deal to kind of have legs. And if we don't get a purchase price agreed to, then nothing goes forward. And so that's, to me, really the critical next step is doing the appraisal, getting a purchase price that we can agree to between the buyer and the seller, to then be able to move into an official option agreement where we have all the terms and things aligned. This is pretty standard practice in commercial real estate, according to our real estate attorney who does this for a living. So I'm kind of taking his word for it, where when you're at this stage where you don't have an agreement, and LOI is a pretty common practice. Again, for us, it's not something I think the town has done before. So it is a little outside of ordinary where we've gone to try and purchase this much acreage. And again, there's risk on our end from the buyer's perspective where, we're going to make all of this contingent on a referendum. So it is creating a challenging dynamic and some complexity. And I think that's because of the complexity of the town and what we're doing and how we're making it very much tied into a potential referendum approval. So at the end of the day, like, we're putting together the agreement, but it's up to the voters to decide whether they want the school and the land. Otherwise, the deal never goes forward and we don't have any acreage.
My understanding, there's still some part of that letter that if you don't agree on a price, releases the downs from some current obligations that they're committed to.
That was
We struck that.
that was what, it was Counselor Clucci who raised it.
I
And then I
understand,
think we
but
amended
there was
to remove
also
it.
another part that Counselor McGee brought up that was concerning, and that, Don, I think you were in support of, and I forget now exactly what it was. In fact, I think, John, I think you had hesitations also about another section of that letter.
So that was the part that basically referenced the elements of actions that the council needed to take by a certain date. So in there, the deal presumes if the school passes in a referendum in November, then we would go to closing by March 31st, and we would have to have certain things done in order to go to closing. And so that reference is pointing to elements that are for consideration that are still to be fully vetted and negotiated. And again, at the end of the day, if we don't get a purchase price, then everything is over and nothing moves forward. We don't do an option agreement, and essentially there's no effect on any transaction between the town and the Downs at this point. So again, to me, the option agreement is really the official binding document that's gonna have the commitment between the town and the Downs in terms of what, you know, transactions need to happen in order to get to closing. That will be conditions of closing in order for us to officially purchase the property. Again, that's all gonna be contingent on voter approval. So if the voters don't like it and they don't think it's a good deal, then when and if this goes to the polls, then they can vote it down if they think it's not the best interest of the town.
So right now is the schedule for November. We're gonna have two questions. You're gonna vote on a price of purchase land and a price on the school.
As of right now, the council hasn't officially acted, so technically the school board first has to approve what they want to bring forward for referendum. If the school board approves that, then they would have to come to the council in August, and then that's when the council would decide what goes to referendum. And we have talked preliminarily that if it does go forward, that either the school land costs get bundled, the school land costs themselves will likely get bundled into the overall cost of the school. So right now, they have a $137.5 million number in the CIP. And, you know, I think if you looked at their business case, their last one, based on some of the savings that they've identified, that number for construction has gone down. So they think they may have enough buffer potentially for that 137.5 to include the purchase price of the land. But again, we don't know for certain what that is because we haven't gotten the appraisals back yet. So again, at the end of the day, whatever the number is, there will likely be a single number that will include the land costs with the construction costs.
So there's no possibility of voting to buy the land regardless of the school.
We could always do that. We could split it, or again, like if the school for whatever reason, if it does go in November and if it does fail, we could still go to the voters again and at another election specifically just for the land if we wanted to. At the end of the day, what we have discussed with the Downs is, say we get to a point where there is no school solution that passes, there's no community center that passes, because it contemplates a community center, then, you know, the town would have the ability to purchase potentially 5 acres or more, maybe. But again, we would have to still get voter approval because we don't have money
Right.
for land acquisition. Our current land acquisition bond that we have, that if it was a community center that could qualify, doesn't have enough money probably to, I don't know if it would have enough money to contemplate buying 5+ acres. Depending on how much it costs.
It just seems like a worthwhile thing on its own to me.
Well, that's what the council talked about, and that's why we have a goal specifically around land acquisition. Because we know we need land. And so, you know, for the school, they need at least 25 acres. You know, we could always use more acreage for other things. So depending on what happens with the school, that could be something the future council may decide that they still want to do a land acquisition bond in the future that would contemplate this so that we could actually have the funds to purchase it if we can't do it. But again, the current, what we've discussed with the Downs in terms of terms,
Is it?
yeah, it's defined to a
Defined,
school,
yeah.
community center, or recreational fields. So we would have to like have a call.
Work within those.
Yeah, sorry, I know it's confusing. Like I've been at it for
2 years.
months. Yeah, it feels like it. And so we've just started to get it out to the public and we wanted to be transparent. And I know it's complicated and confusing, but I think transparency at this stage is important. So that way we can make sure that we bring the public along as best we can, but it's still going to be complicated in the end, likely.
To say just how complicated, to give you some sense of size and scale. You know, I think we had talked about a milestone document that had maybe 12.5 steps and dates. Well, we now have a 36-line list of
We're
things.
getting to the nitty gritty.
Now,
And not to scare you off,
to
but
be fair, that is John's MO. Like
Yeah.
that is, if you go back and look at comms agendas from a year ago, he has us right down.
yeah, to be fair, some of them have actually been completed,
John
so
loves
we
a
are
good
making
checklist.
headway.
I did.
But
This is my project manager background,
Yes,
because again,
absolutely.
I think to your point that you raised, you know, we can still do this right and get a good outcome. the time is getting tighter.
Yes.
And so this is where my project manager background comes into full tilt. And at the last building committee, I was definitely pushing, I think you joined later. I was definitely like getting to the point where I was like, we need a plan, we need an integrated plan. There's no more fumbling, no more separate conversations. We need to all get together and really make sure we're on the same page. So we have outlined, at least on our end from the land perspective, all the outstanding items that need to get addressed, that we're still very dependent on the school to answer so that we can work with the developer to make sure that we're pulling everything together and having a common conversation. And so there are definitely a lot of moving parts that need to converge, and time is tight. I still think it's doable if it's managed accordingly. And at least all parties at this stage are committed to kind of making that time commitment. It's tough because it's all volunteer, right? Like most of these things are volunteer except for the paid consultants. And so trying to get everybody together to kind of
It's a
get,
significant investment
Yeah.
of people's time.
but it needs to happen if we want to get all the parameters by August 16th for this to go to voters, like all of this stuff has to come together.
That's when your council vote will be on the referendum.
Yeah.
How soon before that are you hoping to have a purchase price agreement?
The appraisal is targeted to be done by June 30th. And then my hope would be relatively quickly, we could get to an agreement based on the appraisals, what the purchase price would be, to know whether we have a land deal. And then we would try and get all of the other costs associated with the school that need to be put into the referendum aligned. And then we're also working, Councilor Clucci's doing a great job helping to kind of partner with the finance subcommittee to help them with modeling around the potential tax impact. And, you know, we also want to look at the TIF and how the TIF plays into affordability. So again, these are all the things that I think for the council on August 16th, we want to be able to have all of these answers, including an operating budget for the new school. So again, these are all like a lot of things that need to come together by August 16th for I think the council to have all the right information to make a decision whether we're ready to send this to referendum or not.
You know, just as a along the way, at some point, I understood, I think it was at one of the construction meetings, somebody said that they wouldn't talk about the properties that they were looking at because they didn't want to put the town at a disadvantage with negotiating of a property owner. Which I found kind of interesting, seeing as that, as I've said before, since I heard anything about the new school, there's always been talk about the school and the Downs. After what I've told, that has been an exhaustive search, we've now told the Downs that you have the best piece of property that we want. Talk about a hindrance to negotiation.
Well,
You've told
that's-
them that we've looked at every single possibility in the town of Scarborough, and you folks, you own the best piece that we want for our school. Well, talk about being behind the scene and negotiation. I mean, armed with that information, I'd sit there as a property owner and say, keep backing the trucks up with the money.
Well, that's where the appraisal process comes into play. That's why they have their independent appraisal person and we have our own. And those two appraisals need to come in within a certain margin of each other.
Mhm.
And so they can want what they want in terms of what they think that property is worth, but if their appraisal comes in astronomically out of a different ballpark than our appraisal, then
Yeah.
we either have to agree that we're not gonna come to a price.
Is it public knowledge who our appraiser is and who their appraiser is?
I don't know.
I don't think it's,
Their appraisal is listed in the letter of intent.
yeah, we did just sign a contract with our appraiser. His name is Tom Siegel. I don't remember what his company is called. But we just sign that agreement. So I don't, we're not hiding anything. This was actually a recommendation from the attorney that we
Yeah,
have.
the real estate attorney.
Where again, he had suggested that, this is an individual who
Is an expert in his
Yeah.
field
and has been, many times done these types of things. And so the town manager I know has had a couple conversations with him. I think he met with him on Friday to kind of really kick off the process and get things going. And again, the intent is to, like, as April said, take the two, compare them. We've been affirmed by the attorney, at least if this is done right, because these are credentialed people who have their reputations at stake. Like, nobody's in this to like game anything. They have standards, they're gonna appraise, and when we bring them together, the hope is that they're pretty close. And that this makes it easy to have the next conversation.
Can I just ask about that? Because
Mhm.
as I understand it, you're now at the point of coordinating the assumptions for the appraisals.
Mhm.
And that, to me, I don't quite get that. I mean, they're independent, we've got an appraiser and they've got an appraiser. Okay, guys, go do the appraisal. It seems to me that I don't know anything about commercial real estate appraisal, but I mean, you could come up with vastly different results, I think. I mean, if you, I presume they're gonna do some sort of capitalization of the highest and best use,
Mhm.
but then there's also comparable sales, which could give you a radically different
Mhm.
result. And I don't understand. It seems to me that selecting the method is gonna be more important than going through the mechanics of coming up with a number. Because I think they're very different numbers, I think.
I mean, I just see it as like, rather than negotiating on the back end to try and get to a number, we're trying to align on the front end with no numbers on terms so that we can have an apples to apples comparison at the end, to use that to base our actual negotiation on. And again, the hope and the intent is that, once we flip the two papers and compare the two, they actually are going to be a lot closer than we think. And then, so really, we're trying to avoid the situation where one comes in double the other because their appraiser did totally different assumptions than our appraiser did.
But what if our appraisers' assumptions were the correct ones?
Well, it could actually come in, what if our appraiser is the one that does the double and theirs comes in lower? Like, that's also a very possible outcome. So again, the intent is to try and get them as close to apples to apples as we can. There's still going to be some discretion where they're going to go and do their own thing. So we're going to get it perfect, but at least in terms of key assumptions, to try and mitigate as much disparity as we can to really make sure we're getting a fair market value for it. That's what we're going after. And to April's point, there is the possibility the Downs may see the number and say, nope, we're not going to talk to you guys anymore. Like, that is a possibility too. Like, there's a walk away point for them where they may look at it and say, we think it's worth a lot more. We don't like these appraisals and we're not going to negotiate the land deal with you guys. So that's
The appraisals and what happens from there, is that gonna be public information?
probably the negotiation point of the numbers, I'm guessing, would be probably more behind the scenes, but I would say that the number itself would be in the option agreement, where we would have the number that we're purchasing if we get to that agreement point in the option agreement as a critical item.
The two appraisals are done. Who gets that information, and then who is involved in the?
It would probably, at this point, we have a small negotiating team between myself, Counselor Hamel, our real estate attorney, and Tom Hall. So we're the ones that are like consistently at the table for these conversations to make sure that there's continuity and make sure that we can get to an agreement point. But ultimately, finding the option agreement would be a decision of the council, where, again, if the council is not happy, like, at the end of the day, the council could reject the price before it gets signed as an option agreement. So it's the council who has the authority to authorize the town manager to sign the actual option agreement, which would include the purchase price.
I mean, we went through a much smaller version of this a year ago, you know, with a $12.5 million library plan, which was a lot less complicated than
Mhm.
this by, you know, a huge margin. And, you know, at that time, I remember there was a lot of discussion, well, we're just going to let the voters decide.
Mhm.
You know, and I don't want to try to look at a crystal ball, but I think this one is a horse of a different color. I mean, the complexity and the size of the, you know, of the numbers involved, and the implications if we were to go forward with this in terms of longer term commitments, I think, are vastly different. So I don't really know how the process is going to go, but it's going to be a lot more complex.
So the appraiser, sorry, the company is called Core Market Advisors. And it's Tom Siegel, who's the president, who's working with us. But yeah, this is like, I wouldn't say the library is apples to apples on this, because the library didn't need land. They had their land. They did at one point contemplate other sites.
Yeah.
And again, for them, it was like,
30 minutes, I think.
yeah, it took them pretty quickly to say, this site is, we don't want to move from this site.
But I think we're, you know, going to be, this isn't just a whole league different, in terms of complexity, size, scope, the implications, the implications of doing it and also not doing it.
Mhm.
You know, I think at this point, there really is no plan B. I mean, I'm just quoting the school on this. There is no plan B. This is the plan. So, you know,
I'll go ahead and pitch the next Counselor Corner Live, since we're on the topic of the school. We've had to change the date a couple of times to accommodate me and John's very busy June calendar, but we're gonna, John and I are gonna host Counselor Corner Live on June 27th, which is a Tuesday, to continue to have more in-depth school building
Is that the date
discussions.
of the we're voting on the school budget?
Yeah, is that referendum night for the school budget? That's okay.
that is voting day. Yeah,
Then you can vote and come
Then you
on
can
in
vote and then you can
afterwards.
come on
Yeah. Yeah.
Projects.
We can have you,
Vote.
Richard, we'll have you stand at the polls and tell
Just
people,
drive
like,
people right to.
ask people to
that
come over
discussion.
here.
I have a
When
question
you
about
leave
the
here, go
plan.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, and it kind of goes back to the school capital reserve fund, right? Because if you're using that for buses this year, I'm assuming they're almost zeroed out on that account. And if they're not putting anything back into it this year, those funds won't be available to use for any Plan B projects that may come up, right? Like, I guess in my head, like, I think if this doesn't pass, they are going to have immediate needs they have to address. Portables are gonna have to start to replace vestibules. Like, they're gonna have to start dealing with some of these things, and then they're gonna have a zeroed out capital reserve account.
So, but that's completely within their discretion. They have a ton of surplus that they can just direct towards the capital reserve fund.
At any point, they can do that. But like, why isn't any more going into capital reserve this year?
And that's a school board decision.
Okay,
I would have preferred to see, instead of putting $1.5 million back to the taxpayer, taking at least a portion of that and tucking it into the capital reserve fund. That was the point I was trying to get at. That's,
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's a better solution than just, you know, paying debt when we don't
Yeah.
need to.
Yeah, that also helps us increase our fund balance, right? If they were to do that.
It's the school department fund balance is a restricted fund balance.
Yeah,
It doesn't
okay, so
really
they're single
affect
one.
any of the ratios
Okay.
that we look at.
but they're using like $1.5 million as revenue this year, right?
They are, but for fiscal year 23, they anticipate $1 million to $1.5 million of
surplus again.
So they can, this is more of a prompt to, hey, next year. Because they make these.
But nothing
decisions
will
in
go in
December.
this year. So that account will sit at zero for a year.
But they're not gonna spend any money on these buses for probably a year and a half.
Okay,
It's just the funding source.
okay.
Yeah, because we order a bus and it takes a year
Yeah.
at least to complete the process. So there might be a deposit that comes out of it, but
So that's more of just like when it gets. paid,
Capital
not when it's allocated.
it's different than,
Okay.
than annual. So once you earmark something for capital, it survives multiple years.
Okay.
So that was one of the debates, right, at the last finance committee meeting, where I'm just curious, like where what are you guys thinking in terms of recommendations at this point with the school's capital reserves? And applying it, is that something you're thinking will come forward as a recommendation?
That, we're gonna talk about it tomorrow, but that's what we, where we landed at our last meeting was that we fund the buses from the school capital reserve.
Okay, and that would deplete it to zero from what they currently.
Well, there's currently over 400,000 there.
Mhm.
They have at their discretion to move 1 million at the end of the year if they want to. These funds aren't gonna be required for at least 12, 14, 18 months.
Yeah.
Um,
And
I think it's just hard because every year the school relies on that surplus as revenue
yes.
for the following year. So this is gonna.
Yeah. Well, I
At
think-
some point, it's
somewhere.
gonna catch
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Well, and I think this is a paradigm shift for how we budgeted,
Yeah.
and I think it's moving away from reliance on debt to moving more towards operating. And so, to me, it's kind of like the judgment call of like, how important is our debt and starting to make better decisions with our debt health based on, and rating based on future large investments that are coming potentially. And so, to me, I think it's the right thing in principle to do, but it's gonna be painful in the first year for whoever.
Yes.
And it's just a matter of getting people acclimated to that, because I think that was, I didn't sense pushback on the concept. I just felt like I sensed pushback on, but can we do it a different year? Which I
Right,
think will
right,
always
yeah,
be the
it'll
response every year. It's like, maybe not this year, let's wait till next year, but you gotta start.
Not ready to be told yet.
Yeah.
Wasn't set up to pay for buses. I mean, as one of the board members who voted to establish that account, buses wasn't on our mind.
So, I mean, a little more globally, I can say, I think it's the perfect place to be funding your buses from. And on the town side, we shouldn't be thinking in terms of bond. We should be funding our capital from
I
a
agree.
dedicated account
Mhm.
that has a cap, has a limit, right? So you know when you're out of money, and then we should replenish that account when we need to continue supporting these things. So how you get from where we are to there,
Gonna hurt.
it's,
take time.
this isn't that painful, because you can't really bank on $1.5 million surplus or revenue every year. It's
Agreed.
just not gonna happen all the time.
Mhm.
It's still hard to kind of.
It's gonna, though, it's gonna be a rough year and it would be nice to spread the roughness out over a few years versus kicking the can down the road.
I feel it. I feel like this is spreading out over a couple of years. We're just fighting off the first one.
I think, yeah, I think that's the point, is like these, for this to have impact, we can't just do it this year. We have to be thinking this way.
Yeah. You can't be jumping in and out of the window.
Yeah,
I
So, I
mean, you
mean,
can't, it won't make any sense.
so hopefully at some point, the finance committee, maybe as you guys review our policy, maybe this concept of trying to do what you're
Yes.
describing needs to be a little bit more memorialized to help with future councils, because again, I think it's great, this council is starting it. How do we keep this going in perpetuity
Hmm.
to make sure that the intent of what we're trying to do, which I think is, in my opinion, hopefully correct in that, like, we're trying to move away from reliance on debt and start to fund them the right way, like you said.
Yeah, and
The
then at the
best
end of the
laid
year.
plans, Counselor Anderson.
I
that's
can
the-
put together a
We
project
can
plan.
put together
I can
as
put
much
together-
policy as
Yeah.
we want, and
Yeah.
a future council can undo it.
I think we should pick that up. this
But I
summer.
agree,
Yeah.
and we've been wanting to look at that.
It's,
that policy.
can't tell you how to get there. I can tell you, we've had a consistent cadence with how we approach debt in capital items for decades. And shifting to something that's maybe more modern is the right word, but maybe a little more fiscally disciplined. That's a tough transition.
I think it's the right idea, though. It's good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
At the end of the year, I've got this extra money. Right now, we give it back to the taxpayer while we're charging the taxpayer with interest for these items. Why not just,
Take that.
hey, we have these extra funds. We know these needs are coming, let's put it there for it.
Mhm.
So if the debt ends up changing, does that mean somewhere down the line, school impact fees will start being used for something besides school debt? Like, is that ever a,
Oh, you just opened up the.
sorry, you can scratch that.
So school impact fees are under review and I anticipate, I think we have a workshop coming up. They need to be redone,
Mhm.
okay? They need to be tied to a project or series of projects that are real. We have one with the school project. There's probably others as well. That's that's really how the impacts are supposed to work. Is you measure how much impact for this capital improvement is due to the growth and you charge them for it. Today, our school impact fees, we've been collecting them. They were put together decades ago. They actually don't touch school debt service.
Oh, they don't?
No, they benefit the municipal debt service, which is
Which is
all
the
one
school,
checking,
right?
it's all one checking account, so it's just a little complicated.
Yeah.
Semantics
Yeah, I
wise,
remember us having that
Mm.
conversation.
Yeah.
And
that's one little tweak to the budget order that I'm still contemplating, that
Mhm.
maybe just moving those so that they show up in the right bucket.
Mhm.
Practically speaking, the town
Yeah.
collects the fees.
Yeah.
So next week, the town manager, during his town manager report, is gonna provide a recommended plan. That's kind of like an iterative plan to update impact fees where we want to tackle, like, there's some things we can do near term. And then there's some things that we still have to wait on certain information. So like, for example, you know, at least in our meeting that we just had with him, he had mentioned traffic impact fees. There's some things that we could probably update near term. But we're gonna do the transportation study that's likely gonna identify other investments that's gonna allow us to further update traffic impact fees. But the school is probably something that can come sooner. So he's trying to like give us a guide that says, based on where he sees things lining up, how the council, and it would probably be an 18-month process at a minimum to get all of our impact fees modernized for the current investments. So also at the Parks and Facilities Master Plan, they were recommending we do impact fees. So the recreation reserve account that didn't really have a purpose. I'm wondering if it's now this is the time to like be specific on the purpose, because we have a lot
Fine.
of potential projects coming contemplated in that in the Parks and Facilities Master Plan that could help us justify impact fees to make sure that we're charging development their fair share as we grow.
I've also pulled John into my sustainability committee meeting for June to discuss in their this is an approved document. I can't go back far enough in the archive that's online to see what the council action was taken. But sustainability has a sustainability plan for Scarborough, and in that plan, it outlines a sustainability account. And there is no money going into this account. There is no direct way to calculate the funds that they were hoping to go into this account. So this is another kind of loose end that we just have hanging out there. So while we're having this kind of global conversation about impact fees and various accounts we have, we're trying to pull all of those pieces back together and make sure that the accounting makes sense.
New and different question.
Yeah,
The last I saw, the audit that is late was in draft form. Has it been finalized?
So we just talked about that as well with the town manager, and the last date we got from the company was we would be getting it by tomorrow. I requested that whatever we have by tomorrow, whether it's still in draft form or not, that the full council gets that version to look at. According to him today, it's in like editing mode where they're just kind of doing like a copy edit, it sounds like. And, you know, at this point, I think it's time for us to just have it. And we don't need to keep doing the copy edits.
Folks feel uncomfortable.
Well, the financial statements themselves have not changed. It's really the narrative and the analysis piece that we're waiting on, but you know, we've been assured at least, and we will have to like double check that what was presented at the workshop, which are like the core financial statements, that none of those have changed between the workshop and now.
What's the delay?
The delay in the auditors.
reporting.
Yeah.
When it was reported, it supposedly was going to be within, I believe, within a very short time, a week or so.
Yeah.
that it would be final and
Yeah, I don't think there's no good excuse for the delay that it's taken for us to get this. So at this point, we're just waiting to get it. And once we get it, we'll have it. You know, we have been assured, and Don and I talked about this for potential finance committee action, but since we have half the finance committee here, we talk about it. Was, we really do need to make sure, because by charter, we're supposed to target December 31st for the audit to be provided. And I think we have some looser language in the revised charter that gives a little bit of discretion post that date. But at least according to the finance director and the town manager, we want to make sure that that happens. And so we talked about maybe the finance committee just helping to make sure and guide the plan to make sure that we're kicking
Hit
things
that
off.
target
We're
this
not,
year.
yeah, we're not delaying things too much.
Yeah, there are some reasons for the delay that are valid. I mean, Ruth was out a lot last year, and then we had a gap with no finance director for a period. So what would usually happen in July, August, September, just didn't happen. Norm started in January, and that's really when we started the audit. And unfortunately, that's also when Markham, who's the auditor, is tied up with commercial accounts because of commercial year ends. So I think they either couldn't or wouldn't make the schedule work to get it done. They've been kind of fitting it in. And now that having been said, we're going to be in June, so this is way too late.
Yeah,
Have they signed off on the audit? There's gonna be a date that they've signed off in the audit report. Have they signed off yet?
Not to my knowledge.
yeah. So that's the last thing we heard from them through the town manager was May 31st is when we should get it, which would be tomorrow. We asked him today, are we getting it tomorrow? And we didn't get confirmation, but we're pushing for it.
I mean, when we heard that it was a week away was, what, a month ago, some 3 or 4 weeks ago. I mean, it's gotta be more than editing. Something's not.
There was an issue. So they, in addition to our audit, there's some, I think they call them single audits that they do to test whether federal funds that we've received have been used appropriately. I do believe they found an issue with the school department's utilization last year in FY21, or what was reported in FY21, that they were working to resolve. That was part of the most recent delay. It wouldn't affect the FY22 numbers, but I want the whole, to me, the management discussion analysis is relevant, as are all of the schedules that are included in the report. You kind of need to take them all in together. So I would really love to have had that in my hands before we even got close to budget season, because then we understand where we stand.
Okay, well, isn't the management discussion, isn't that ours? We're the ones that do that, not them.
Yeah, we
That's
have done extensive follow-up on this. And we've gone as far as we can. So other than actually writing it ourselves, there's nothing more we can do until we get it. So we've done everything humanly possible. And I'm a broken record on this thing.
But hopefully you hear tomorrow. It's here. Yeah, if you don't hear tomorrow, it's here. I will personally send you an email if we have it.
What's gonna be your response if it doesn't exist?
Pardon?
Let's,
That's what's gonna be the council.
If we don't get an audit, I don't know. I don't think I can actually put that into words.
anyone else want to put it into words? I mean, at this point,
I
like,
don't know what action we could take or what could be done
I don't
from a
think,
council perspective,
I don't think we want to delay the budget,
right?
because at this point, then it would be whatever was presented.
Yep.
At first read, and so we have to move the budget forward. I mean, at this point, rather than focusing to Don's point, I think we're kind of at where we're at. It sucks to be here. I want to focus on what can be done to not be here next year
Mhm.
based on what we've learned. And again, some of it was just some things that were outside of control in terms of retirements and illness and new people, and those are excuses, but that's what
There
happened.
were reasons.
I was trying to get to a specific regarding the town manager, who I believe is in charge of the town, as he has said. So I think the fact that it doesn't exist is in his lap. If he told you gentlemen tonight that it'll be here tomorrow, I think that as representatives of the town, you have an issue with the town manager.
Well, I think one of the things that we also have at our next meeting by contract is to have a conversation on regarding a personnel matter relating to the town manager's employment agreement. And so I think, I anticipate during that executive session, this topic could come up as part of that conversation. So again, like, I think that's, up to the discretion of the different counselors based on what they view as the town manager's responsibility to see how that may factor into the conversation we need to have at our next meeting.
I promise this is the last question I'll ask about that, but what are the implications in terms of our fiduciary debt reporting responsibilities? The debt agreements say we have to present the financial statements to the SEC or some governmental agency by March 31st or something. I think it's 270 days after the end of the fiscal year. What happens when we are not in compliance with that? Do we know?
So the last I followed up on that, we were in compliance because I believe it was a little nuanced, but the way it's worded, the commitment that we actually make is that once we have it, we turn it over immediately. I'm paraphrasing. I'm going to try to find specifically how we worded it, but that's what was communicated to me, is that we're still in compliance for all of our outside reporting. We filed an extension with GFOA and they were happy to grant it. So I don't think it, that having been said, nobody likes it being this late. I mean, I don't know that it'll specifically ding us when we go out to market again, but it's something that they're gonna see and want to understand a little bit, I think.
Yeah, in the past, we did have serious compliance issues, and I think it probably was an issue. Goes back quite a few years, but we were, I think, sort of routinely in violation, and that did, I think, come to the bondholders' notice. So it's not a trivial issue, I don't think.
I agree.
Other budget questions? You guys are asking the hard questions. That's good.
One, not a question, but a request in terms of the way we report the TIF aspects of the budget. I mean, a lot of this stuff, the 58% sheltering, I think it'd be really helpful if the budget book itself gave a better idea of what's really going on here. Show me the sheltered value, its history, its projection if you have it, but at least let people see, okay, we've sheltered, another $120 million this year in the downtown TIF, whatever the number is. And here's what that's going to mean in terms of additional state GPA, the educational amount, so that we can actually, it becomes something less abstract than a TIF to most of us.
I think that's a great point, Steve. As we kind of get our arms around the fact that we now have a TIF district that generates revenue, this is going to be, there is a learning curve in terms of how to report that and how to communicate that. And I absolutely agree with you that the budget book needs to reflect our increased learning about what all this means and what the impacts are. And there's a way to do that. So
And we're in year 5.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, we need to have a better sense of what it all means.
Sure.
Other than, okay, we've got $800,000 that we can assign to, this piece of software or something like that.
I'm with you too, Steve. You sent a note about this and I gave it a good amount of thought, actually. What I think we can clearly show today is what the impact is today of prior shelter. right? Because there's a lag. So
Yeah,
if we
right.
shelter $1 million today, we're not gonna get that benefit for a couple of years.
No, but you can say what that benefit's going to be in those couple of years,
We
right?
can guess,
Well, yeah,
yeah, we could guess, but we can say with definitively what the benefit was this year. And then you trend that, right? So you have a couple of years to look at, you can see how it's changing.
I do think this is an important topic though for better public communication to your point. Because again, as we talk about the school and other debt, I know we're gonna be talking about
Yeah.
how TIFs are, one of our mechanisms to help keep the tax rate down. But I think I've heard many people who are less familiar with it expand what they project that value to be. And I just want to make sure that we're careful near term, because I think we're starting now to ramp it up, which is great, but like the true benefit of the TIF comes when there's much more of a build out. And so in my opinion, we're still at the early stage of the TIF benefit, that even if it is leveraged to help pay for a school, it's going to take many years, I think, for the fund to be enough to have a sizable impact. It'll still be good in the near term, but it's like, the benefit of the TIF comes with the development that occurs. And if things stagnate or slow, then you're not going to have as much benefit to offset the tax rate. And I think that's a story that, correct, Counselor Clucci, you're kind of helping guide a little bit with the school project, or maybe you were asked to guide, or maybe this is news to you, or.
I don't recall committing to anything.
Yeah, okay, well, you probably.
Just did.
It's coming for you.
No, well, I mean, I think the point is that, this is a concept regardless of the school that does need better explanation. And we do have a good website that tries to articulate it. But again, I think it's still theoretical to your point, Steve, and like to be able to like get really
Incorporated.
to the numbers is gonna be
Actual
helpful.
figures.
I think we can make it tangible.
Yeah,
yep. I mean, 5 years ago, we couldn't spell CEA and TIF, okay? And now we're just,
when I first joined the council, I thought they were the same thing, and it took me like 2 years to figure out that they weren't.
oh, we figured out how to spell them.
Tax shelter benefits to people who
And those
don't
benefits
live in
flow,
this world is very challenging.
and those, very complicated. Those benefits flow differently to the partners in the agreement. It's quite clear that our partner, the Downs, has really been able to rack up big numbers in the early going. And that's part of the incentives, the way it works for the developer versus the town, and this is under this TIF and the CEA. So, but one thing is for sure, we're farther behind. We're just on the board this year in terms of actually having funds to use, number one. But there's also, in my mind, I think we need to be have a better handle on a fully loaded cost to serve, fully loaded and updated impact fees. Tom is working on this now as well. We're updating all these numbers. And the other thing for me is for partners, any partnership, there should be a mutual benefit. And I'm going to be very focused on the proportionality of those benefits, between the partners in the CEA and under the TIF. So we don't have a good accounting of that right now, or anywhere near a full accounting for the town.
What do you, in terms of what?
In terms of, so we got $1 million something we can spend now, and we're gonna be counting on the benefits of captured value to help keep our mill rates low. Some of these things are hard to quantify and hard to communicate. So I want to be able to kind of sort of side by side look at, okay, what have they made on it? And what have we made on it? And how should those benefits, are they 80-20 or are they 50-50? I think we need to give some thought to that. And to try to, evaluate whether that is really, fitting with our expectations and really benefit that we had anticipated when we engaged in the partnership.
The way the carrots and sticks work, and we only have so much control of this, is unfortunate, because when you grow, you immediately recognize that revenue on your budget. And then the state takes it away, right, through their funding formulas. So if you utilizing TIFs helps to normalize that a little bit. So if you enter an agreement with or a CEA, it makes it a little more appealing. in the long term, because the state isn't taking as much of it away as quickly. In 30 years, it all goes away. They take it back though. So you have to recognize that whatever benefits you're getting today, you're gonna lose at some point. So it's kind of important to spend those monies on like capital items or things that aren't,
Operating.
aren't gonna create a cliff.
Create a clip, yeah.
Mhm.
One other thing I would like to see removed from the budget is this $500 mystery amount that I've heard 2 or 3 different people say is just a placeholder to buy land. I don't think we need such.
Finance committee, took it out at our last meeting.
Oh, you do? Okay.
We haven't taken a formal vote. We will next meeting, but yeah.
That's
we
gonna be
did
the
take it out.
recommendation.
Thank you.
Don appreciated that.
Well, I'm on board with you with something, huh?
Yeah, you go. We'll take that win. We'll take
Keep it
it.
score.
Yeah.
We're also on the board with that too.
I think I can quit now.
What else can we do for you gentlemen tonight? Anything?
Good questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great conversation. I always enjoy these.
Gentlemen and gentle ladies, or gentle.
Oh, yes, and of course. I don't even, I haven't quite drawn the line between resident and peer anymore.
Like when you go in the restaurant and the server comes over and says, can I help you guys? You know,
Yeah.
you're sitting there with your wife,
Yeah.
okay?
Sorry, I didn't mean to call you that.
Let me use.
No, not at all. No, it's an over familiar.
Well, yeah, I almost feel like she's like school board, like I feel like you're representing the school, you're not officially representing them, but I feel like you bring that history with you that
Yeah.
makes you part of the elected group discussion.
Slipping fast.
Yeah,
Changing
you,
quickly.
you don't miss it.
Life change.
Yeah.
I'm glad you came back.
Yeah.
Just so I am in agreement, I do understand the need for a school. I have issues with the process. To the point where we are, and I am concerned that when you're up against time, that can lead to some unhealthy or questionable or not in the best interest of everyone decision. That's a concern.
I think that's.
Yeah, I
that's
think,
fair.
and that's a legitimate risk at this point that we just need to manage as a group and make sure that between us, the board, the building committee, I don't think anybody wants to do anything and make a mistake.
Yeah.
But I think to your point, the tight timeline just creates that risk, and I think it's one that we're all attentive to. And the one thing I will say about this council is that they get into the details and they look at the details. And so I don't suspect that somebody won't catch something. And I think it's important as we go forward, like a lot of the process, like it has been mostly Don and I at a lot of the meetings, and I'm trying to figure out as we go forward, how do we bring in that talent more to make sure that they're looking at it? Like Councilor Cucci, I love his attention to detail. He's like, that's his strength. And I think being so close to it, I need a person who's not as close to it to capture the issues. And so, I mean, like, that's just like one example. Councilor McGee, Councilor Hamel, Councilor Seichler, I think everybody is very attentive to things. So I have a feeling if things look bad, I don't think this council will move it forward, but I think we're trying to plan for success.
We'll use the special teams concept of substitutions and.
Yeah.
We'll use that.
Well, I tried to offer,
I
someone else to come and do it from here, because I was like, Don, we're kind of at a point, we passed the LOI. Now, who wants to take it from here?
No one's standing.
And everyone was like, it's okay. Yeah. But again, if anybody's interested.
Okay, so at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and ask Peter to end the live stream. We do not have any other attendees online this evening. But I thank you guys for your participation and
Thank you for doing it.
and the finance committee meets tomorrow night at 4, 5, when do you meet?
I think it's 5:30. Yeah.
5:30.
I'm gonna look at my calendar in the morning and I'm gonna be there.
That's really, literally a time of day